Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to the Law Scholar Show. I'm Selena.
And I'm Calissa, a rising senior, and we are both law scholars.
That's right. I'm also a rising junior, and I guess you guys are probably wondering what a law scholar is. So, my friends and I come together every Saturday to unpack a book called The Color of Law, which really goes over the implications of redlining. And we unpack it chapter by chapter, issue by issue, and then we go on live to kind of explain our opinions and the statistics backing all of that up. And Law Scholars is actually with an organization called Clever Communities in Action. So, Clever Communities in Action focuses on the promotion and placement of culturally affirming literature in order to improve literacy rates, build community, and heal traumas inflicted by systemic racism within the African American community.
So Clever Communities in Action actually has a couple of programs under it, including the Law Scholars, which is what we're doing here today. And then we also have another program called Read to Lead, LEAD standing for Learn Everything About the Diaspora. And what they have done is donated 3,000 books by Black authors to Title I elementary schools. And we also have the Virtual Village Show, which is in its 5th season every Wednesday at 1. So it is hosted for kids by kids. And what they do is read books, Black children's novels to be specific. And if you have a niece, or nephew, or son, or maybe you want to sit and reminisce yourself, you can join there again Wednesdays at 1. And then we also have another program called Razor Sharp Readers, which is bringing books to barbershops. We're kind of tying everything back into the community.
That's right. So, right now, we're just going to go ahead and introduce the rest of the Law Scholars.
Hello, everyone. I'm Gianni Lee, 17 years old, and an incoming freshman at the George Mason University.
Kennedy, you're on mute. That's okay.
Hi, my name is Kennedy Wallace, and I know how technology works. I'm 18 years old, and I'm on my way to Howard University.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ure. I'm a rising junior at Princess Anne High School, and I am 16 years old.
So you guys have probably noticed our really cool shirts. These symbols are called fahodis. They are in a Dinker symbol, really popular in Africa, and it represents independence. And I personally think it's such a good representation for law scholars because it really just symbolizes freedom, and that's what we're all about.
All right, and now that we have concluded our introductions, we're going to move into topic 1, and I'm going to let Selena take that off for y'all.
That's right. I'm going to be joined by my friends, Ure and Kennedy, as we roll right into how the IRS contributed to the segregation of metropolitan areas. Ure, why don't you take it away?
Yes, so the first thing I'm going to talk about is what is the IRS. So the IRS is the Internal Revenue Service. They're responsible for collecting taxes and administering the Internal Revenue Code. The statement is, it is a consolidation and codification of the general and permanent laws of the United States. So basically, the IRS in the past had many things that kept Black people, us, from prospering. And they did it by supporting racist and pro-segregation nonprofits, even if they weren't considered state actors.
Right, that's exactly right. I noticed, and this is a big problem within the IRS because they state in their International Revenue Code that any educational organization seeking tax-exempt status must serve a public purpose in harmony with fundamental policy. Yet with this in place, the IRS still granted the tax-exempt status to white-only academies for more than a decade after the Brown v. Board of Education case. Most of these institutions were created to evade this ruling. So in that, we see the hypocrisy of if you must have a public purpose in harmony with the fundamental policy, but yet you are giving the tax-exempt status to white-only segregations who are not in harmony with the public policy, we can see how that is very problematic.
Yeah, another thing that is like a problem is that when businesses are deemed or organizations are deemed as nonprofits, they have this view as being like charitable and they get a symbolic seal of approval as agents of the common public good. So, we're going to be talking about like an example of this, but just like if these organizations are displaying like bad attributes such as just racism or any discriminatory practices, and they're being enforced and guided by the IRS, a government organization, then like that's just like horrible that our government would be supporting things like that.
Yeah, it's just like another way for racist organizations to just like get out of like paying taxes and stuff, which just gives them another financial boost that people who really need it like they don't have. And also, it like when there really is a nonprofit organization that's doing good, like it's kind of hard to tell because they have like the same kind of like shield almost. So before you just donate to places, like you really need to look into what you're donating to, like information, like background information, like everything before you give your money away to to someone who's actively trying to hurt a member of our community.
Right, right. And that's why I'm so grateful for Clever Communities in Action. They donate books to a lot of students. We see their good works. We know what they stand for. I'm really happy to be a part of this community and this organization that I know is doing the right thing and is healing these racial traumas. But we see that the IRS was not just giving the tax exempt status to schools and nonprofit organizations, but we see them doing this with the synagogues and the churches, where members of these synagogues and churches or the pastors of these synagogues and churches were actively pushing an agenda for racial segregation. In the landmark case, Shelley versus Kramer, the restrictive covenants, which is basically just like restrictive housing, it was struck down as unconstitutional. And 40 years after that, the IRS continued to give tax exempt status for churches and synagogues who are just instrumental in leading these residential segregation efforts. It was a violent resistance for the Sojourner Truth Public Housing Project for African Americans in Detroit, Michigan, and it was led by a pastor of a local Catholic church. This pastor of the church said the construction of a low-cost housing projects for colored people would jeopardize the safety of many of our white girls. His position as the president of the association and the association meeting in the church did not threaten the tax exempt status, while these two things were instrumental in enforcing restrictive covenants.
Yeah, Kennedy, like when we look at the fact that this pastor, someone who is seen as like a leader in a community, and that this organization, or at least the church that they're a part of, is like given that tax exempt status, and there's so much like obviously there's so much hate in his heart for him to say something like that. Like it's genuinely like horrible. And even though these decisions are being like made by private institutions, they are being funded or at least tax exempted by the government. So like when we talk about like de jure versus de facto segregation, when things are funded by the government, it's just because the government doesn't want to like get their hands dirty. Like they will still put all of this effort into breaking our communities, and doing it in ways that they thought could be secret. But you know, we're unpacking that now and we're trying to see how that can affect us today.
Going back to what you were saying, you were like how pastors are seen as leaders. It's kind of a lot more than that too, because like Catholicism is like based on like purity, and like Christianity is about like just most religions really is just about like accepting people and like loving everyone. But when you're like pushing like this like hateful agenda onto people who look up to you, like see you as like morally correct, like see like you as like, they put pastors on like such a pedestal. And so when you're preaching like this message that that's really just like anti everything you're supposed to be rooting for, it's just like really harmful because it just like really puts it in people's mindsets, like from every like aspect of their lives.
Right, right. And then when we have something that's so powerful like money, like a tax exempt status, not being even threatened, like, hey, you can't keep making these public messages of this, you can't keep housing this certain organization's meetings in your church because they're becoming affiliated with your church. It's just very a powerful tool. If they threatened to take away this exemption, I'm sure something would have changed, but they did not, and they showed their approval and their backing of these statements by standing still and being a bystander and continuing to offer that status.
And all their methods, like they really like were working, and like that's the heartbreaking thing.
Yeah, so I think just with everything that we're hearing about the past, I think it's really important to recognize how it is affecting us today. Like something that happened to me, I was like my whole life, I really wanted to get into nonprofit work, and I really saw it as something that was like a no-brainer, perfect thing. And there are so many amazing nonprofits, like CCA especially. But then I met this guy at this event I was working at, and he was a Trump supporter, and he was talking about how he majored in nonprofit work. And there were things that he was saying that was obviously just so incredibly like hateful. And then he like asked me, how do I feel about opportunity zones, which is something that Trump put into place that gave tax exempts to like basically the rich who funded economically distressed communities. And like Selena said before, it's so important to look at nonprofits and see like why they're doing what they're doing and if it's for the right reasons. Like opportunity zones, that's something that was tried and tried again like since Nixon's time. And these places that are economically distressed are because of things such as like redlining. And the communities would definitely benefit more through jobs and development, but any rise in real estate value that these things called opportunity zones was putting in is just going, the initial capital from it is going to the people that are investing into it. Like we see it time and time again with any gentrification, as it's supposed to benefit the community, but it's only lowering the community. And when we talk about tax exemptions, it's crazy that something like opportunity zones was put into place, and the only way people would help is if they had tax exemptions. Like people wouldn't do it out of the like greatness of their heart or the fact that like they put them there in the first place. Like it's so horrible.
Right. And you just see the power of these tax exemptions and how they're just so easy to sway people's mind in the way that they react and the way they do things. So again, when we see the tax exempt status not being threatened, it's just, again, a seal of approval, because we know that if they had threatened that tax exempt status, I'm 98% sure that something would have changed. Thank you, Ure, for tying in like the present to everything. We had the other follow-up question, which was, how is the government's racially discriminatory financial practices continued in the 21st century?
All right. So the first thing I want to mention is that low-income communities aren't really able to supply their schools with as much tax money as more like affluent communities. And so that means like less college prep courses, which means it's a lot easier to go through life with a degree. And like if you're actively putting things in place to stop African American students from getting one, that is again just sending them right back to the harmful situation that redlining has really put us in. And so it's kind of keeping the cycle going. Like it's really, there's so many things in place just trying to like keep us from getting as far as we could get, like trying to restrict the success that could be. So just heartbreaking.
Yeah. Kennedy, I just had like a question because I remember once we talked about like the difference between like Grassfield and maybe somewhere like Oscar Smith. And I think in one of our discussions we talked about how Grassfield has a lot more like AP courses and stuff. So I was just wondering if like you could like say anything about that.
Yeah, I definitely see a wider variety of AP courses being offered at Grassfield High School. That's something that I noticed for a long time, but I guess I never really thought about the reason why they were being offered there as up until very recently, up until our conversations that we've had at our meetings. And we just see a lot of other opportunities and things being withheld from students at Oscar Smith because it is majority Black and maybe a lower income or tax bracket. And of course, I don't agree with it. Of course, I think it's not fair, but I just feel like this is just an example of how things like what we talk about and we mention in this book, it's still relevant today. All of it is still happening to this day. And I think that's why that's important and why it's important for us to educate ourselves and to use literacy as a weapon. So we're aware of these things.
Yeah, because Grassfield, of course, is like predominantly white and like it's so much higher funded than some of the other schools like Oscar Smith. And so it's like, it depends on like where you live, which of course we talk about so many times and how like majority of Black people were put into these situations and then they have to go to a school that has less funding, and also like less advanced courses, which makes them less appealing to college. And like I just said, then no degree, which means a less chance of a good future, a future that everyone wants.
Yeah, like even like one of our fellow law scholars was talking about like a struggle with the prices of like AP exams. Like just to me personally, it's so crazy how many things have a price tag. And so many like just simple pleasures and simple things that could get you that education that like will kind of ensure like success in the future has so many things behind it. Like I think it's genuinely like crazy how far back African Americans were put. And even now we see that today and people just seem to want to ignore it. And I think there's just so much to be fixed, but like me personally, I think that education is the root to solving all of our problems, making sure that like us as the youth and everything are the ones who are, like fighting for these changes to occur.
When you say like they don't want to know, like the whole like ignorance is bliss thing is so, I mean, it's true. Like if I didn't know about all the things that were trying to hold me back personally, I'd probably be happier, but I definitely wouldn't be like making actual like moves to be better. And so if you don't know the things that's happening to you, like you can't really try to undo them, try to like push forward and help other people too. And when you say like simple things that just put us back more, I was talking to my mom yesterday, because we were going to the movie theater, and the movie theater closest to our house is like in like a higher income white area, and the gas prices over there were so much cheaper. And she said like, you are it like they're helping the people who have more save more, which means they just get more and more ahead. And like grocery stores, like the grocery store quality over there is so much higher than the grocery store quality than like other places that I've seen. And so like they have like fresh produce and like healthier options and like more options, and it's like which contributes to like the health crisis. Like there's so many easy things that like the Black community could do to help their lifestyle, but it's so hard to do when they don't have access to it.
Yeah, like we definitely even talked about just how like factories were built near Black communities, and like we could literally see that in Norfolk and like the Tidewater Gardens areas today. And I remember like in one of our like really early meetings, Mr. Jordan talked about how they were building like a McDonald's inside of one of the public housing, and that's just so crazy. Like access to things should be easy, and especially when it deals with things like property tax, like that is literally feeding into the idea and the concept of like where you live determines what you have. And when you can't leave where you are, or when your previous ancestors like lived in these bad areas and it gets passed down versus like having like rich ancestors and it being passed down, like it's genuinely just like very horrible.
Right. And speaking of where we live, another method of, excuse me, I apologize. Another method of racially discriminatory financial practices was reverse redlining, which is basically the excessive marketing of exploitative loans, housing loans in African American communities. And there were so many African Americans communities being exploited that it caused the 2008 financial crisis. And these exploitative loans are called subprime loans, which are basically loans that have extremely high interest rates that are very hard to pay back. And when these loans go into default, which basically means the borrower is not able to pay the money back, the houses went into foreclosure. And when they did, lower middle class African American homes went just devastated. Everything became devastated for a lot of African Americans. And this discriminatory practice was tolerated and encouraged. It was encouraged by bank regulators, and it was just widespread throughout the industry with little state or federal regulatory response. And when we see things like that, when we see just preying on and making money off of the Black community, and maybe on to the detriment of themselves, I just see just a lot of unfair practices and hypocrisy, because we are all supposed to be protected under the law. This statistic really was crazy to me. And it said in the year 2000, lower income African Americans were twice as likely than lower income whites to have subprime loans. Then it says higher income African Americans were 3 times as likely as higher income whites to have subprime loans. This tells me that this was not a income thing. This was not a tax bracket thing, but this was a racial thing. They were preying on the African American communities. And again, like I said, under the 14th Amendment, we are guaranteed equal protection under the law. And when the federal and state regulatory agencies were deliberately carrying out an agenda of exploitation and discrimination, we just see the hypocrisy, and we just see our African American legal and constitutional rights just being violated.
Yeah, like just everything that you said, just everything that you're talking about how literally it's legally putting us back, I think is just absolutely horrible. And I think it's so important that we're realizing these things and looking at the legal actions that happened literally in 2008, and just like, like making sure that our leaders are doing things about it and making sure that we are educating people to know what we can even do about it. So I think that is kind of all we have to tell you about.
Yeah. So with that, we're going to go straight into the open discussion. All our in there, just make questions, comments, to like, subscribe.
Selena's buffering a little bit, but basically ask us questions in the comments, and we will be answering questions that were previously posted already.
Yes.
So I'm going to start with Jamir's question of, have you guys considered have nonprofits use their status to provide aid when in reality they are preying on local populations on a global scale? And I think that kind of ties back to what Ure was saying earlier.
If you want to take that, Ure.
Yeah.
Okay. So preying on local populations on the global scale. I think I'm a little bit confused about what it means by global scale, but I definitely know just like when I guess you're talking about providing aid, when I was talking about opportunity zones, like their idea of providing aid was investing in those communities, when the best way to do it would be to give jobs and to like focus on the education over there. But instead, it's just giving capital and benefiting the people who are investing into it and giving them tax exemption status. So I think, yeah, I don't know if that's what you meant, but definitely there's many people who use that even to this day, many nonprofits. So I think it's really important just to recognize it.
Mm-hmm. And I think there's it's called B Corps, but basically it's when they're not necessarily given the nonprofit title. However, they do like get some benefits. It's when a business gives like 10% of their profits for the rainforest, or 10% of their profits for water or clean water in a country that may not have it in that area. And a lot of these companies are using that title to kind of get more people to buy their product when they're really not giving much at all. Because that that 1 cent per dollar it's not a lot.
So totally, like I see a lot of things where it's like, oh, like buy a bracelet and it's like $1, or like, or even the things where it's like repost, like every repost is like $1 to the rainforest, but people don't actually look into those. So how do you know that like they're really, or do they just want the clout from it? And like, I think that's a terrible thing to do, like when you really just want like the attention, instead of actually trying to help the rainforest.
All right, so Lauren Williams is asking, hello, what steps can we take to make all schools equal in the education process?
That's a big question. I think personally, maybe we could start teaching critical race theory and open the doors to more options with that, because it could let in and then give you a better understanding of how the Black community feels and really does what it says, give you critical race theory. I think that's would be something that would be really beneficial in making school equal in the education process and giving insight on that. I think that would help a lot of teachers and students, not just students, teachers as well.
Gianni's right, and also just prioritizing funding for lower income areas, because you like the funding offices really just kind of look over places like that because they really don't care enough to give their money towards it.
Yeah, like personally, I've been looking into like policies recently. I know Elizabeth Warren had one that kind of entailed the idea that it's given to the government, and that the states would have more control over the distribution, because right now it's very like, I guess, like at a federal government level, and there's not much control as to how the money would be distributed in schools. So I think just, yeah, I'm definitely like not like completely educated on her program, but I know that it basically entailed like giving like each state government more power, and even like each district more power on how they want to distribute it, because definitely there is like lots of work to be done with it.
Absolutely. Mark Anderson says, one of the largest problems with the color of law is the lack of enforcement by the federal government to ensure equal protections of all people. I agree with you.
I agree with that. It's not really a question, but I agree with that statement.
Yeah, I agree with that statement a lot.
Spot on.
Yeah, I definitely agree.
It just kind of.
The federal government really doesn't do that much to make the change that they say that they're going to make.
They put a lot of stuff in writing, but they never really go through with that writing.
Yeah. Wanda Berg says, what can urge you on and
Okay, Selena's lagging again. So Wanda Bird says, what recommendation or guidance do you offer other young people to get involved to affect change? I'm sorry, Selena.
I recommend just first looking within yourself and realizing what matters to excuse me, I apologize. First, I think looking within yourself and figuring out what type of change that you want to get into, what matters to you the most, what is like your major cause of change. Then I suggest finding an organization that you really feel like matches your like CCA, that matches like your drive and your goals for change. And then I just suggest staying strong, and staying true to yourself and staying true to what you know is going on. And not letting other people, intimidate you or make you back down from that.
You guys, Selena or Calissa.
Like also like spread the ideas to your friends too, and like talk about it as much as you can, because the more people that know, the more people will agree with you.
Also, going back to what Kennedy said, like Clever Communities in Action is doing, like pick up a book, read an article, or just but mainly books. Like turn to a book, take the information, like really dissect it, maybe even take some notes, and then use that information and go and have conversations with other people. Like, I promise you, even if like you could talk to your teacher and they'd probably be like, wow, they know so much about this topic. Like, they genuinely be impressed with you for taking the time to do all that research. And then you talk to your teacher and then you spark a classroom conversation because they thought that was an interesting topic.
Yeah,
Like
I
our name,
definitely.
oh, sorry. I was going to just say, like our name use literacy as a weapon, and that can affect change.
Yeah, like definitely reading is something that I'm very glad I was introduced to when I was young, but I know lots of people either don't have the time for that or even what we learned about like in places like Tidewater Parks, the average education there is in ninth grade high school education. So like some of the books, like especially the one we're reading, like it confuses me a bit. Like I really have to look at my personal values to find out what I truly enjoy. So honestly, like just making sure that like young people are surrounded by people who want to bring them up and have the ability to like share like the information. Like I really try to talk to my friends about these things because I know some of them might not have the time and stuff to read, even though it's like really important and stuff.
Jamir Starks asks, what books would you all suggest?
The color
My,
of law, of course.
oh, excuse me?
Sorry. I just said the color of law, of course.
Oh, yeah, The Color of Law, of course. But my first, like, book was the Willie Lynch letter, The Making of a Slave. That was kind of what really radicalized me. And it really is sort of like the basis of a lot of my opinions about Black liberation. And it really did change me and my viewpoint on a lot of different things, open my eyes to a lot of different things. So yeah, definitely the Willie Lynch letter.
I think Frederick Douglass's autobiography, I think that was a really interesting book. I actually had to read it for English, so it was something that was required, but it definitely started me into the path of like reading other novels by Black authors and going into information like that because I thought it was interesting. Just find something that piques your interest to start with and continue from there. And I think this is going to be our last comment for now. We will get back to the rest of the comments later. However, we do have a little intermission for y'all, and then we're going to move on to our next topic.
And that intermission is brought to us by Gianni, who's going to give us a little bit of Black history on the Norfolk 17. So,
oh yeah, Gianni.
Yeah.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for watching. I'm going to go over a little bit of history in Norfolk, the Norfolk 17. If you already know, they are a group of 17 Black students who were admitted to predominantly white schools in Norfolk, Virginia, February 2nd, 1959, which is about 3 years after 3 years of long court battles with our Virginia governor at the time, Lindsey Almond Jr. And they were what I didn't know beforehand. Looking into Norfolk 17 for a little bit, I thought that all of them went to the same school. I thought all of them went to the same one school, and I wasn't sure what school that was actually. But after doing some research, I learned that they all went to 4 different schools. They went to Murray High School, Norview High School, Blair Junior High School, and Northside Junior High School. And these are not all 17 went to these 4 high schools, but they all separately went to, I guess, whichever one was closest to their house and stuff like that. And they didn't just get into these schools because they were the lucky ones out of the lottery of Black kids. They had to take rigorous tests, testing their academic skills, and it just goes to show how smart these kids were. They were not they weren't just regular kids in a class, and they weren't dumb kids either. They were very intelligent, ahead of the curve kids. These were they were the top kids in their classes. They were really smart kids. And as they were going to these schools, and I did my research, the students said that the environment in their school was very hostile, and they said their school, as they described it, was hell. They went through a lot. They went through people spitting on them, throwing their books, kicking them, destroying personal property. It was very hard emotionally, I think, and physically and mentally. And you would think, oh, it would break some people, but they had a very strong community, the Black community outside, who was there to help them, mentor them, and they had each other to talk to and to be like, this is what happened in class today, guys. I can't believe it. Like, I don't know what's going on. But they came back every single day to get the education that they wanted and the education that they deserved. And then fast forwarding, because some of them aren't alive today, when they, after they graduated and went to college, they did establish a very good career for themselves. They were doctors, they wrote books. These kids grew up to be very smart and academically strong people. They did not just waste their lives or drop out because it got too hard from all the kids bullying them. They pushed through and they made a successful life for themselves. And I think that just goes to show the strength and the endurance that they had. And I really commend them.
All right, Deani, thank you for that amazing and very educational introduction. If y'all ever have time to look at your local history, I recommend doing so because it's usually really interesting to see kind of what happened on the streets that you are literally walking down. But anyways, we're going to get into our topic 2 and start off with this leading question of how did Black people's incomes become suppressed and what impact did this have on the Black community and how does this translate into modern day? So I'm going to kind of kick us off a little bit by saying that you're likely to make more than your parents, but not enough that you would be moving into a whole different class level. So the chance of you going from low income to high income today is around 4%. Today. So with that said, oh, go ahead, Deani.
I was just backing up saying yes, it's incredibly hard.
Yeah, it's difficult. But I just wanted to put that out there because I'm gonna kind of be tying that back into my points. But basically, when the slaves were first freed, they had to turn to sharecropping because in the Constitution and under the law, they were given rights and defined as citizens. However, there was really nothing there put in place to help African Americans assimilate into American society and to give them resources to kind of move them up the ranks. So what sharecropping is, it's basically you're given a plot of land by a landowner, and how you pay for this land is giving them half of your crops. It could vary from around half or to 70%. So then to make a profit and to make a living to buy food and other stuff that you need, you would have to go out to the markets and sell your crops. However, if you're already giving up 50% of your crops, then how much money are you really making? Right? So, and like I said earlier, it's very, very difficult to move up the ranks socially and class-wise. So it kind of put Black people into this never-ending cycle of poverty that has continued for years and years and years.
And going back on what she said, if we fast forward into World War II, where they had factories which should have given Black people better jobs with higher paying, because you need people to work in those factories for just to make things, but that is not what happened. They had switched to military production because they were doing civilian work, like creating stuff for civilians, and then they switched to military work, creating like weapons and clothes, all that stuff. And you would think African Americans would be able to get better opportunities, but they got the lowest paying jobs in those factories. Janitors, cleanup crew, they did and they did so much. They would work for hours on end, only getting paid like maybe $2 an hour. Maybe. And it's crazy because it's like they needed them. They probably did need them in those higher positions to get them the material out faster and quicker, but instead they had them sitting there, probably folding up laundry maybe for them, or like mopping the floor, just doing the absolute bare minimum.
Yeah. And then adding on to that, like you could not unionize. Black people were excluded from unions. There was a law that kept this discrimination from happening. However, it was repealed. It was the 1935 National Labor Relations Act. And basically that stated if you discriminated against African Americans in your union, then you were not able to bargain with your employer, which is literally the entire point of the union. So what had happened to that law was it basically got repealed by the American Federation of Labor, because that was another very powerful and prosperous union, and they kind of used their influence to get that taken away. So then that kind of furthered discrimination in the workforce and further suppressed incomes because Black people were not allowed in unions. And a lot of these unions actually started calling for Black people to be removed from their job. So if you even had a job, you couldn't fight back.
It was a good chance that it would get stripped away from you, even if you did. If you tried in the little, it's like ask for a little raise, you could get fired for that. And there was at a point in time where somebody tried to fight first and tried to get these segregation and exclusion out of these defense industries, and that was A. Philip Randolph. He actually organized the first March on Washington that didn't happen, actually. He organized it, and he wanted Roosevelt to ban segregation and exclusion for African Americans in the defense industry. He wanted that, and he said and he told Roosevelt, I will stop the March on Washington if you ban segregation and exclusion of African Americans in the defense industries. And a week before the march was about to happen, Roosevelt wrote saying that he was going to ban segregation and exclusion for African Americans. Now, in writing, he did say that, and it was banned. It was not supposed to be happening. However, as we know, and has happened a lot in the past for African Americans, it was put in writing, but it was never executed. It was very much so a law, but everyone ignored it. All the white people just said, I don't care, you're black, I don't like you, you're not going to work here.
Right. And it was never enforced.
Not at all. And when it's a private company, it's hard to really enforce the owners or even public, because the government didn't want the black people working there. So they just wrote a law just to shut us up and be like, oh, well, it's in the law. Like, okay, cool. But you're not doing anything about it. You're not pushing for people to actually abide by the law. Mm-hmm. And that's just an ongoing issue with, I think, a lot of it.
And then going into our little follow-up question, it is, how did primarily Black industries, which are agriculture, cotton, and domestic services, become excluded in labor protections? And how did this further income suppression? Basically, I'm going to kick this off again, but what had happened was to get the New Deal passed, Roosevelt kind of had to appeal to Southern Democrats, and to do so, he had to exclude African Americans from the New Deal. And in doing this, labor protection laws in agriculture and domestic services just were not included in the New Deal. And then you had a bunch of New Deal programs, such as the Civilian Conservation Corps, that were extremely segregated. So if Black people even got a job, they were given the worst jobs. And you also see this in the Tennessee Valley Authority and the Federal Relief Administration, where they also segregated jobs. So you had a lot of New Deal programs that Black people were excluded from, which goes against their entire constitutional rights. But again, none of this stuff was really enforced. It was in writing, but nobody took it seriously.
Yep. And they purposely, like she said, selected positions like housework and certain industries, in which is run predominantly by Black people. Like a lot of Black people who worked in the houses and were maids and stuff like that, and could not use any of the New Deal programs at all. It just goes to show how the government really in-depthly used their resources to keep Black people out. And Miss Star Armstrong commented, this is important information. People need to know all the ways in which Black people have organized and fought for liberation. We never sat and did nothing, and that's a huge misconception. That is true. We fought a lot. We fought throughout history, and I think it's really important to know that, because it'll remind us to keep fighting, keep going on, keep continuing the fight that our ancestors started, because there's no point in stopping now. We got to keep pushing. We got to keep going.
And now we're going to segue this into our open discussion, because I know you'll have a lot of questions, and we're going to try our best to get through all of them with the rest of our law scholars up here. Hello. So I'm going to go back and get the questions from earlier.
I hope everyone is enjoying themselves, because I know I'm having a good time.
So true. All right. So Jameer says the donations are for tax breaks, and their aid that's given that. Sorry. And the aid that's given is but a drop in the ocean. It's all about capital developing itself, while there is a veneer of progress.
No, yeah, that's like definitely true. Like at like Food Line, when they'll be like, donate $1 and you'll be helping the rainforest, but that's just giving them like tax breaks and tax exemptions. And either way, it's not really doing enough as it could be like you yourself like donating or just, I don't know, not going for these big organizations.
Because a lot of people, they don't even actually round up to the dollar. So it's like, I don't know. It's just like not as much as you could be doing if you really wanted to like make a difference.
Oh, guys.
We have so many questions. It's hard to organize them.
Anyways, Jamir asks, if the federal government fails at administering change, then what avenues would you suggest should be taken by communities to address their concerns?
That's a great question.
I think maybe we should.
I don't know. I gotta reread that one.
That's a good question.
I think there's lots of stuff about like self-fulfilling communities, such as just like it doesn't have to be nonprofit work, but just people helping each other. I think things about the federal government administering change really goes to your personal values of you thinking whether or not or having hope that the government could change and that good things could happen. I just think that for communities to do what we can to have like the best things happen, it would just have to be like recognizing the resources. And I don't know, like resources are given to certain people, and that's why we've had to fight as long as we've had to get them. And I think we're fighting as hard as we can and we're trying our best. But me personally, like I do like have some hope that the government and that things will get better and stuff.
I think personally, I think going out into your community and trying your best to support that specific community on your own is going to create a lot of change, because you're going to, one, be inspiring people, you're educating people, and you're just uplifting your community in general in the way that the government has never really supported us.
I agree.
Yeah, I don't really have that much faith in like the government going to like help us out, because it's been a while and they're not doing as much as they should be. So I think that it really is in the hands of the community.
Mark Anderson said, what effect would more community involvement do to help direct educational funds on a more equal basis?
My bad, guys.
Watch it there for a second.
I accidentally closed the tab. But yeah. Okay, moving on.
But yes, we had a question by Mark Anderson, Selena, but you so rudely just left. I'm kidding, but I'll restate his question. What effect would more community involvement do to help direct educational funds on a more equal basis? I think it would bring more support to the education field and to the fact that schools need more involvement and more funding just in general to help students thrive and succeed in general in education.
Totally. Also, just like I said this before, but informing like your kids at a young age, just like a more like direct things. That way, like even if like the school system fails again, people know anyways. But yeah, I think like more like reforms to, because I saw recently that I don't remember which state, but they signed a thing saying that like teaching about Martin Luther King like wasn't mandatory anymore. Like it like they're going backwards instead of it was okay. It was Texas, by the way.
Yes, it was Texas.
Yeah, they're going backwards now instead of like progression. So I really think that community involvement is the way to go instead of educational funds, because they're clearly trying to keep us silent in any way that they can.
Yeah, like with things like, what's it called? Like events where you go to the school board and you like speak. I'm sorry, I don't know like the correct term for it, but things like that, like making sorry, it's just like making sure that people like have that knowledge and can even take it to the government so that educational funds can have an effect. But obviously community involvement and making sure like you're doing your best for your community and such will like have like a really big effect on the people like directly around you.
Guys, nobody told me I was muted. Anyways, moving on. We have been asking what books y'all would suggest. I think we hit on that earlier.
We did.
All right, so we're going to move on. This is all important information. We read that.
Yeah.
Okay. So Benita Harris asked or says, sometimes people think that Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves. No, our people freed themselves by escaping, rebelling, discreetly meeting, learning how to read, and refusing to accept the institution of slavery.
No, absolutely. Like the education system is so quick to say that like white people saved us, but it's like who did it? And it's not like Abraham Lincoln like signed the Emancipation Proclamation out of the kindness of his heart. Like the war was expensive.
Economic reasons.
It was he definitely didn't care.
Can I go into my history real quick? Because I'm a history buff, so I love this stuff. And this question just speaks to my
Go ahead, Johnny. That makes your heart
soul. So yes, Abraham Lincoln at first did not care one lick about the slaves. He was just thinking about the North, and he wanted the North to have more money than the South. And he knew that the South, money in the South was slaves. Black people was their money, our trading, everything. And so he was like, if I free the slaves, then that means I'm taking away their money. So why not do that? And that's exactly what he did. And that was honestly the sole reason as to why he helped free the slaves. But he never considered himself an abolitionist, honestly, until the end of his term and up until he died because of Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass really changed his mindset on everything. But yeah, there's your history lesson of the day from Biani.
Yeah, when we have I'm sorry, I want to say something about the last comment really quickly. But when we have our affirmations and our Law Scholars Creed, a really powerful line that we say is, I've been passed the baton by my ancestors. And this comment really made me think about that. I've been passed the baton by my ancestors because I feel like our ancestors had fought and freed and rebelled and discreetly met and things like that. And they inspire me because I feel like now it's my turn. Now it's my turn to do the same for my community. And then my community can do the same for the people after me and the generations after me. So yeah, I think that's a really powerful thing. And that makes me really happy to be Black. So
that's such a great thing to say, Kenny. That was just like one of those good statements.
Thank you.
All right, and that's Harris is asking what do you think about the Black community voting in low numbers and now enduring even tougher voter suppression laws, and what can we do about it?
Wow, that's a lot. I think that Black communities, well, first of all, it's really hard for Black communities to even get out and vote in the first place because there's a lot of things in place to stop them from even getting there. And it like discourages a lot of Black people, and like that's like a huge factor in like why like they can't get out and have their voices heard, for sure.
I think this one is something that you would have to be very individualized, because I can't really think of a way that you could get a massive number of people to go vote. But if you can have those discussions with your close friends and then your family and y'all all go vote together, that's really the only thing I can think of.
We really just have to spread word in the community, really just let like Calista said, let our brothers and sisters know you have to go vote and get educated on. And you can't just go and vote and pick someone. You have to, I think, really have to understand who you're voting for and what you're voting for. And understanding that just voting for the presidential elections is not really helping you. You got to vote for the primaries. You got to vote for your locals. Your locals are very important.
Your locals are the ones.
Right. You really need to vote for your locals over anything else.
And I guess
honestly, sorry.
Oh, I was gonna say, like, I guess like a lot of Black people really think that government officials like don't have their best interests in mind. And for the most part, that is kind of true. But the local ones are the ones that most likely do and can like invoke the most change in where you are.
I feel like Black low voter turnout, is just kind of a result of frustration too. Other than like all the things in place, I feel like we are so fatigued of these racial battles. Sometimes we just feel like we've been voting and voting and voting and voting, and our voices are still not heard. So I think just reminding that, you know, our voice matters, every vote matters. And I think just encouraging us as a community that when we stand together, you know, we cannot be divided and we are a powerful force as
Yes.
we scholars.
All right.
Oh wait, can I just say something about that last one? Just like I remember I was like running polls and I was by like Purpose Park in Norfolk, and like people were telling me how they might have like had a felony which keeps you from voting, or just the fact that like of course like when you look at like the presidential elections, like both candidates, you know, like it's not really like I guess the big change that we want to see. And I think lots of it has to do with like the correlation between low income individuals and Black people, because you know we were put into those situations because of obviously like previous legislation. And I think it's just so important to realize that like, you know, like Kennedy said, like we're tired and like we keep fighting, and like the world, like I guess in the next question, like this capitalist society, like someone's at the bottom and they decided that us Black people have to be at the bottom, and we're strong and we're like important. And I think it's just really important to like keep fighting that fight and doing as much as we can.
I agree. I'm gonna move on to this comment from KP Patterson. Basically, they're just recommending a book, The Warmth of Other Suns by Isabel Wilkerson. So if any of y'all want to go check that out, go ahead and do so. And then moving on to Lauren Williams. Okay, Deani, right on Deani and educating us.
Fan club.
Right. All of you ladies are on the money and doing your homework. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Wow.
Okay.
As we're about to close out, I just want to remind you guys to like and subscribe and follow our social medias and share. And keep an eye out for our upcoming documentary, which really shows like our journey on this process and how we got here and like our learning experience. And that should be coming out pretty soon. So don't forget to keep your eye out for that.
Right, Selena.
Shout out to our shirts again. These are Dinkra symbols from West Ghana. This one specifically is Wahudi, meaning independence. And now we're going to close out with our creed, and I hope the rest of my hope you all enjoyed our show.
Wow.
I am a law scholar. I am a powerful force.
I use literacy as a weapon for liberation.
I use literacy as a weapon to uncover hidden truth. I am a young change agent. I have been handed the baton by my ancestors. I have the support and protection of my community. I am an asset to my community.
I understand that I have the responsibility to empower my community as I choose my path in life.
I am a law scholar, and I use literacy